Namaste, and a very warm welcome, dear brothers and sisters from across the world, to the 24th day's last session of the Global Festival of Yoga celebrating wellness. This program, as you're aware, is being organized by Indica Yoga, and Indica Yoga is a platform that is dedicated to promoting authentic, immersive, and transformative yoga traditions, its teachings, its practices. Sincerely hope that your journey with us thus far has been to be transformative in its own ways. This evening session is a very special one, and I'd like to start it with a chant invoking the Vedic Godheads. So those of you who know the mantra Shanno Mitra, please join along with me. Om Shanno Mitra Sham Varunaha Shanno Bhavatvaryama Shanna Indro Brihaspatihi Shanno Vishnururukramaha Namo Brahmane Namaste Vayo Tvameva Pratyaksham Brahmasi Tvameva Pratyaksham Brahma Vadishyami Ritam Vadishyami Satyam Vadishyami Tanmamavatu Tadvaktaramavatu Avatu Mam Avatu Vaktaram Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Having invoked the blessings of the Vedic gods, I would now like to invite our dear friend Hannah from the Global Peace Initiative of Women, which is a collaborating organization for this festival, to please introduce the topic as well as the speaker of the day.
Thank you so much, Anuradha ji, and warm greetings from New York City and pranams to everyone who's here today. My name is Hannah, and I'm very excited to introduce you to the session on the Vedic deities and their relevance today. Today's speaker will be Dena Merriam, who is the founder and key convener of the Global Peace Initiative of Women, which is an organization in New York City, which looks at how we can address global challenges from a spiritual and internal lens. If that wasn't enough, Dena is also the author of 3 books: My Journey Through Time, The Untold Story of Sita, and When the Bright Moon Rises, which is her latest book. Without further ado, I'll pass it off to you, Dena.
There, I got it. Namaskar. I'm very happy to be here to talk about a subject that I'm deeply engaged in right now, which is the discovery of the Vedic deities. First, I want to say a few words about how I came to this. I am not an academic. I don't know Sanskrit, but I'm a Kriya Yogi, a long-time disciple of Paramahansa Yogananda, and more recently, a student of Sri Aurobindo. He is my teacher of the Vedas. And I want to first place the Vedas in their historical context. I'm also something of a time traveler, and in my books, I go back into different times, mostly through my own memories of previous births, but sometimes I tap into a collective memory. And in my latest book, takes me back into the Vedic era. My Param Guru, Swami Sri Yukteswar, in the 19th century recalculated the cycles of the yugas, which he said had been lost during the Kali Yuga, the understanding of how to calculate them. And then there are very specific mathematical and astronomical calculations. And he was a master mathematician and astronomer. And so he was able to calculate this 24,000-year cycle. And now there's a larger cycle. When people say we're in the Kali Yuga for the next hundreds of thousands of years, that's a different cycle of time they're referring to. This 24,000-year cycle specifically refers to the evolution of the human mind in the earth community. And so now I want to call upon a chart so we can see where the Vedas, where the rishis fit into this cycle of history. And we have to look back to 11,000 BCE. What was happening on the planet at that time? Well, a big meteor hit the Earth, which melted the ice, which was covering large portions of the Earth. And so the ice age ended. The oceans rose 400 feet over a relatively short time, might have been, a few centuries. And it was in this context that the human community moved away from migration. Huge migrations took place. The rivers came. With the melting of the ice, new rivers came. And human communities started gathering around the rivers.
Yeah, we need you.
And the Vedic
Hello?
poets, I don't know if it's up on the chart, but this is the chart that I wanted to show. Is it up? I don't see it. There it is, yeah. So 11,000, this is when the ice began to melt. The Vedas are somewhere in here. So Western scholarship mistakenly places the Vedas around here, 1000 BCE, 1500 BCE, because they're referring to the time then it was compiled and written. But for many, many millennia before that, I mean, Ram is in the Treta Yuga. The Vedas were known at that time. For many, many millennia, it was an oral tradition, because during the Satya Yuga, they understood. So what was the Satya Yuga? It was the decline of the intuitive age, when the understanding of the power of vibration, the seers understood the power of the spoken word. Language had a totally different use than it has today. So this is when the poems were heard and brought out of the ethers. And now I want to refer to how Sri Yukteswar refers to that age. He says that the ages of intuition were passing away into the first dawn of the age of reason. The seers saw that the intuitive faculty was going to decline, was in the process of declining, so that the logical reasoning faculty could emerge. At that time, there was much less ego consciousness in the human community, much less individuation. The ego was not developed. The reasoning faculty was in an early stage, but the intuitive faculty, direct perception of spiritual truths, was there. And over time, that intuitive faculty became hidden, and the reasoning faculty and the ego consciousness was strengthened. So Sri Yukteswar says, the Vedas are perhaps the last testament of the ages of intuition, the luminous dawns of the forefathers to their descendants, to a human race already turning in spirit toward the lower levels and the more easy and secure gains, secure perhaps only in appearance, of the physical life and of the intellect and the logical reason. So over time, we can see how understanding of these cosmic forces, all of what the Vedas speak of, hidden through metaphor, is the uncovering of the immortal in the mortal, how to awaken the immortal in the mortal. So all of the cosmic forces that they speak of, which we call the deities, these are cosmic forces that have both an external and internal reality. They are within us. These cosmic forces help with the process of awakening the immortal consciousness within us. Now, when you look at how this understanding declined over the ages, so that Indra over time became a petty and jealous god, just seeking to secure his throne as the king of the gods. Compare that to what Sri Aurobindo says of Indra. Indra is not only a luminer, but a fashioner of right thought formations, the intelligence which discerns, solves, or removes confusion and obscuration. We can take the chart down. I just wanted to place the Vedas in the Satya Yuga and show where we are now. This chart was done in 2014, but we're a little bit beyond that. So we're actually emerging into the Dwapara Yuga. A long way to go till we get to the Satya Yuga. But Indra is the intelligence which discerns, solves, and removes confusion and obscuration. The Maruts under Indra are energies of the mentality, energies which make way for knowledge. They break down what is established to make way for new movements, new formations. Indra uses the Maruts as his instruments for the illumination. I think these few quotes from Sri Aurobindo says it all. Now, I want to tell a few stories about Indra. And then I want to really focus on Indra and Devi Saraswati, because these are the These are the cosmic forces that I have the most intimate awareness of. Even though we always start with Agni, the divine will, my personal relationship at the moment is with Indra. And then I want to talk about how these cosmic forces are working within our individual lives and collectively on the planet right now. So when the rishis are invoking Indra, they're invoking this cosmic force, which is within us, which is internal as well as external, for a daily increase in light in the form of truth. Now, when we look at how the understanding of this has declined over the ages, it's really quite shocking. I want to tell a story from one of my books, The Untold Story of Sita, which is a famous story, actually. Let me find it. This is the story of sage Ahila and sage Gautama. It's a famous story, and the way it's told is that Indra, seeing the beauty of Ahila, goes in and seduces her. And then her husband, sage Gautama, comes out and sees what happened, and he curses his wife to become like stone. That's the common telling of the story. But of course, Indra is then displayed as a petty deity. But Sita tells the story differently. One night, she's in the forest with her children, and she wants to tell and they had heard the story of Ahila and Gautama, but they heard it the traditional way. Kush says that one of the boys in the hermitage said that sage Gautama had cursed his wife for being unfaithful to him, and that this was a lesson for all women. What does that mean, Mom? Ma asks Kush. Mata was quiet, and I suspect she was debating whether to speak to them of that matter. In the end, she decided to tell the story. I will tell the story of what happened because I knew them. She began. When I was a child, the son of sage Gautama and sage Ahila was our family priest. I was fond of him, but there was a sadness about him that I couldn't penetrate. Whenever I asked him why he seemed sad, he replied there had been a family tragedy many years ago that had never been resolved. I went to my father and asked what could be done, but Pitaji just shook his head and said we must wait until the right moment. Nobody would tell me what this tragedy was. Then one day I met Sage Gautama. He was among the many sages who came to speak with my father, your grandfather. So this is Sita telling the story to her children. I saw the same sadness in him as in his son, and so approached him. He replied that he had once committed a terrible deed and was suffering the consequences, his father. I went to my father, Sage Janak, and asked him, Sage Gautama is so wise, how could he have committed a terrible deed? Pitti replied that no one knew for sure what had happened, as Sage Gautama refused to talk about it. But it was said that Gautama's wisdom and his wife's beauty was so great that even Indradev, chief among the deities, envied the couple. Out of jealousy, Indra came to Lady Gautama in the guise of her husband. When sage Gautama was away and caused her to be unfaithful, she thought he was truly her husband. When sage Gautama returned and saw what had happened, he cursed her and she became like a stone. She remains like that to this day. This is what my father explained to me. Is this the story you've heard? Sita asks her sons. They nodded. Then I will explain what truly happened, says Sita to them. I did not believe that Indradev would deceive such a pure and knowledgeable woman as sage Ahila. I cried about this and finally determined that I would approach him and ask Indradev himself, and so I did. You saw Indradev? Asked Kush in amazement. Mata nodded. So in this book, I call Sita Mata. You went to Swargloka, Mata? Kush asked in amazement. She nodded and replied, indeed I did. It was before you arrived at the household. She's talking to her servant. Before you arrived at the household, Sita. It was in a dream. One night I found myself in Swargaloka, standing before Indradev. He looked at me lovingly and said, "Child, ask your question. You may ask of me anything you wish." This happened when Sita was a child. "Why did you deceive sage Ahilia?" I asked with tears streaming down my face. He replied, "It is the role of the devas and devis to test all the sages to help bring out whatever imperfections remain. This is necessary before they are permitted to enter this heavenly realm." So I took the guise of her husband and went to Sage Ahilia to test her powers of perception. As soon as I entered the cottage, she saw through my disguise and challenged me. "Indradev, why have you come in the guise of my husband?" I told her that I only come to test her perceptions, to see whether she could perceive truth, and I took my leave. Just then, Sage Gautama was returning from his meditation. He saw me leave his cottage, still disguised as him, and assumed his wife had misbehaved with me. A great anger arose in him. He started to curse me, but Sage Ahilia ran out to prevent this deed, which would have had terrible consequences for the natural world. She stood before her husband and Indradev and received the curse herself. She immediately turned into a stone-like form, silent as a boulder. Indra went on to say, "I turned to him and said with great sorrow, 'See, great sage, what your anger has wrought on an innocent woman who has done no wrong. I only came to test you both.' Sage Ahilia saw through my disguise and did not err, but you were not free from anger and doubt. Then I gave Sage Ahilia the choice of coming with me to Swargaloka or remaining in that stone-like body until her husband freed himself of anger. She chose to remain so that they could enter the celestial realm together. Is there no remedy for this?" I asked, this is Sita talking now, I asked Sita, Indradev in a pleading voice. "A remedy will come very soon, my dear." So that is, so Indradev is known as the one who comes to test the sages, to test all of us, but who is Indradev but this higher mind, the mind that is the enlightened intelligence that is seeking to awaken us from our delusions. So I want to, Sri Aurobindo, who I consider to be one of the Vedic rishis, was able to revive for us the true understanding of who Indradev was, because over the decline in the yugas, in the decline in ages, he came to be seen as a petty god who had jealousies. And the way that story has come to us is that Indra was jealous of this beautiful woman and wanted to seduce her, but in reality, he was testing both of them. And Ahilia passed the test, and her husband did not. So he had to go and seclude himself in meditation. Now I want to tell another story, and this is from a book that I've just written called When the Bright Moon Rises. It begins in the Vedic age, and it then moves into ancient China. It follows the evolution of a soul. But in this story, there's a young woman who goes into one of the women sages. Her name, a woman sage whose name I can't remember, so I call her Sage Gayatri. And she is telling the story to a young student who's come to her. This is a story of a woman rishi named Appala. And Appala had written some of the Vedic hymns, and she is the daughter of Maharishi Atri and Anasuya. So this young woman comes to her hermitage, and she really doesn't understand very much, but she's fallen in love with another one of the sages who's a brahmachari, and so they can't have a relationship. So she comes into this hermitage, and she's studying with this woman sage, and she tells her the story of Appala. So I'll read just a little bit about this story because it's relevant again to who Indra is. She's telling the young woman, there is a woman rishi named Appala. She is said to be the daughter of Maharishi Atri and Anasuya, the great rishis who have lived so long and will remain on earth well into the future. Maharishi Atri is one of the Saptarishis, 7 great sages who remain on earth for an entire cycle of time to guide humanity. He has brought forth some of the most complex hymns of the Vedas, and a person has to be quite advanced in knowledge to understand their true meaning. Appala is not as well known as the sons of those 2 great sages, but she is every bit as wise. When she came of age, a student of her father's wanted to marry her, but as he was inspired not so much by love as the thought of being married to the daughter of the great rishi. Appala knew this, but since he was a beloved student of her father's, she agreed to the marriage. And over time, she came to love him very dearly. Some years after the marriage, she developed a terrible skin condition. In fact, she knew this condition had been sent by Indra, who tests the sages, but her husband didn't realize that he was being tested. And disgusted at the sight of her diseased skin, he abandoned her. The sage paused. Why did Indra do that? The young girl exclaimed. He is such a fearsome deva. The sage laughed. Not at all. Actually, Indra is very much beloved by the sages, for he is the spiritual power that reveals the inner light, that retrieves it from the hidden places. He releases that inner illumination, the light of knowledge that has been overshadowed by darkness, the forces of ignorance. In this role of entering the darkness of our minds to make known the inner light, one of his duties is to test the sages, and he was testing them both. If a sage fears Indra, it is because he fears the tests that will come. But these tests will only strengthen him or her. Anyhow, Sage Appala realized her husband had failed his test. She was not surprised because his love was not very deep. She was determined to help him. One day, she was walking in the forest when she came across a soma plant, which is used to make the drink of immortality, and is beloved by Indra for the intense joy it bestows. One knows that one has achieved immortality when one tastes this indescribable joy. It is very rare to find that plant, and instead of keeping it for herself, Sage Appala decided to offer it to Indra. Plucking the plant, she called out to him, and bowing low, made the offering. He appeared to her, and in response to her devotion and generosity, bestowed on her 3 boons. Do you know what boons are? The sage asked the young girl. The young girl replies, blessings or gifts of the devas. The sage replies, this is how they are perceived, but actually they come as a result of one's spiritual efforts, usually after long years of meditation. In this case, Indra offered these boons to Appala because she had passed 2 tests and risen above selfish desire. Instead of turning bitter after her husband abandoned her, Appala's love increased. Instead of taking the soma plant for herself, she offered it to him, and so Indra knew the purity of her heart. He told her the first 2 boons would manifest immediately, but she would have to strive to gain the 3rd boon. Guess what she asked for? The young girl replies, to be free of her skin disease? The sage replies, due to her selfless nature, the first 2 boons she offered to her father for his long life and prosperity, and that he would have whatever he needed, and those wishes were granted immediately. Now remember, her father is the great rishi, and so she first thought of his importance to humanity. Her father, he became young again, and his hair, which had been falling out from age, began to grow until it was as thick as it had been in her youth. The third boon she requested was to help her husband overcome his short-sightedness, but she was going to have to work to gain that. She found a cave where she could enter solitary meditation, and she remained there for many years. The sage paused. "How many years?" the young girl asked eagerly. Leaning forward, the sage replied, "Over 1,000. The young girl's eyes opened wide. The sage said she encountered difficult struggles, but she persevered because she knew that her husband could not advance spiritually until his heart opened. It is said that Indra pulled her through the eye of the wheel of his chariot. "How horrible!" the young girl exclaimed as a shudder ran through her body. "It is a metaphor, dear," the sage hurried to assure her. "It means that Indra put her through many tests, but she surmounted them all. Finally, one day she came out of her meditation and returned home, not as an aged woman, but as a very beautiful lady. Her skin was clear as a cloudless sky." While she had been in meditation, her husband had died and been reborn several times. She knew he was not a young man. He was now a young man, so she searched and found him. As soon as he saw her, he fell deeply in love, not with her beauty, but with her strength of her spirit, with her spiritual attainment. Her meditations had helped him grow spiritually, so he could understand what truly mattered. They married again, but this time he loved her deeply, and their marriage provided much benefit to society because they were a model of a perfectly balanced couple, and each honoring and respecting the wisdom of the other. So this sage goes on to tell us the stories of Indra and how he awakens the illumined mind in the sage. But Indra tests not just the sage. All of us go through our own tests in our life because he is the force of evolution. So what were the Vedic? I have wondered often why the Vedic rishis focused so much on Indra, Agni, Surya, whereas over time we came to focus on Mahadev and Vishnu. And I learned that the Vedic rishis' primary concern was evolution, individual and collective evolution. And the cosmic forces, which I remember are both external and internal forces, Agni, Indra, Surya, are the forces of evolution. Agni being the divine will. We can't do anything without awakening the higher will. And even the lower will is needed to accomplish any kind of task, to achieve what we want on the earthly basis. But the divine will is needed to be awakened if we are to evolve and achieve our potential. So the Vedic rishis focused on the process of evolution. And we stand at an evolutionary moment right now. And so the Vedic deities are very active. Now I want to read another passage from these passages from my book, When the Bright Moon Rises. When many years later, this young girl who's now become an older woman encounters the sage again. And she asks the sage about Saraswati. Who is the Saraswati? A lot of the conversation takes place by the Saraswati, but this young girl, who's now an older woman, is now living in Kashi by the Ganga. And her teacher, the sage, comes to her. She says, "You once told me you would explain to me who Saraswati was. Who is she? Is she just a river?" And the sage replies, "She is far more than a river. She is the active creative power, that within us which inspires, transmits knowledge, and seeks to express itself through song. It is said that she rests on the tongue of the poet, and is she who breathes words into the poet's mind. But she is not only within us. The force we know as Saraswati is also bringing into being new stars, new planets, new life. She is the flower unfolding, the seed within you that bears life. She is that great creative force that moves through the universe, bringing the unmanifest into manifestation. She is all that, the young woman explains, and now an older woman explains. Now I would tell you of her relationship to the river. For ages, the seers had been in meditation high in the sacred mountains where the waters were locked in ice. They were there when the ice began to melt and the rivers began to form. Perhaps they even aided that process. Some of the seers say they heard the deity's footsteps guiding the river in its downward flow through unmarked mountain paths. Some saw her hand caressing the river to stir the waters and generate life. Some saw her light body emerge from its depths, and so the river was given her name. She imbued it with creative power, and for millennia, poets and sages have gained their inspirations from that river. Seated in meditation on her banks, that is why so many gather by her side. She's also here in the Ganga. She's in all the rivers, but the Saraswati River holds a special place in the hearts of our poets because so many of their songs were inspired by her outward flow, which led them to the inner Saraswati, the inner flow of life, which then opened them to the mysteries of the universe. The woman student says, that's a lot for me to understand, but I'm sure your words will remain with me for a long time. The sage nodded and smiled. What I'm explaining cannot be grasped with the mind alone. It must be experienced, and that is the purpose of meditation, to give you that inner experience. Each one of us can attune ourselves with the same creative power that gives rise to the poetry sung by the seers. The sages are able to hear the words emerge out of the silence. We can do the same if we truly set our hearts and minds to it. So, the role of Indra and Saraswati. So in the writing of these stories, I came to see the workings of Indra in my own internal reality. Indra comes not just to test the sages, each one of us in the process of awakening, in the process of realizing the higher immortal nature, have to let go of the lower nature, have to let go of the small sense, the small ego identification. And how do we do this? With the help of the cosmic forces, which are internal as well as external. Over time, these forces became externalized, and we came to see them as Indra, the thunder, the lightning. But the Maruts, which work under Indra, are the thought forms, the thought forces. I'll go back, I want to keep repeating this because as I was recording what I was experiencing, it was only after that I turned to Sri Aurobindo. And I said, oh my God, what he was saying is exactly what I was experiencing. The moods are the thought energies. I'm looking at, I can't find my quotes from Sri Aurobindo, but it's okay. The thought energies that work under this higher mind to break down negative thought forms or limited thought forms so that we can come into a higher expression of thought forms. So what is happening now in our world? We stand at an evolutionary moment. According to my Param Guru Sri Yukteswar's chart, we're emerging into a new age. Satya Yuga is known as the age of direct perception of truth. The Treta Yuga is known as the age where we can abolish time. We can pierce through the illusion of time and also understand the workings of magnetism. The Dwapara Yuga, which is the age which, according to my Param Guru, we've just entered, is the electrical age, where we understand the properties of electricity and can erase space, so we can conquer space. So we look at what's happening in our world now. We are at early stages of conquering space. Okay, so we've been to the moon, but there's a lot more space to go over the next many centuries, 2,000 years really, if we survive on this planet. then we will go to far reaches and be able to really conquer the limitations that we perceive as space. But also we will have a much deeper understanding of the workings of electricity, which scientists don't have. They can observe its properties, but they don't understand it. And then, of course, in the next stage, the mystery of magnetism will be understood, and time will be able to erase the illusion of time. So this is it, but there's also a linear evolution which moves toward greater and greater complexity. So we are not only at the point of entering a new yuga and moving within within the galaxy, slightly closer to the center of the galaxy, which is the force that holds it all together. But we are also at an evolutionary moment where we have to, if we are not going to destroy the planet, we have to evolve toward beyond this sense of selfishness and just worrying about material gain. So we need to be aware of the evolutionary forces within each one of us. And how does this relate to? This was the wisdom that the Vedic rishis understood, and that they encoded into the Vedic hymns, waiting for the time when a greater portion of humanity could understand the whole process of evolution. And Sri Yukteswar, who, as I said, regarded as a Vedic rishi, is one of the few who really can help us understand the evolutionary forces within each one of us. So we each have to work on our own evolution, because that's part of the collective evolution. And so we are at this critical moment in our journey, where the more of us who can awaken to our higher nature, the more the human community will be able to develop a civilization based on Dharmic principles. So how does this relate to our well-being? On an individual level, all of the things that come to us are the tests that the higher mind, that our higher self is sending to help awaken us. And most often we respond very impulsively to these tests without understanding their deeper nature, their deeper purpose. What is it I'm meant to learn? I mean, even the smallest test, a relationship issue, a work issue, everything is meant to help us grow. Nothing is meant to break us down. It's all for the purpose of growth. And this is Indra working within us. And as I was on my journey of writing this a story of this young woman in the Vedic age who comes across this great sage, I saw the workings of Indra within my own being. I was able to look back at my life and see the many tests that I had undergone, and understand that each one helped strengthen my resolve, helped me grow in a certain way. Nothing was for the purpose of harming me. It was all for my benefit. And once you realize that these personal struggles and tests are for our own growth, it's the cosmic forces within us working for our own evolution, because everything in the universe is working toward the awakening, toward our true nature, toward the true reality of being. And that is where our well-being lies. We look at our the fear that is on the planet right now, a fear because of the virus, fear because there's so much breakdown. The breakdown is happening because these are forms of a limited mentality, a Kali Yuga mentality that no longer serve the evolution. And that's why they're breaking down, because they don't serve the evolution anymore. So they have to break down. Now, this is where Saraswati comes in, the creative power. Saraswati, Brahmini, the feminine force of Brahma, which works within each one of us. Now, when we think of Saraswati, we think of the arts, and truly the arts are a gift, because the arts are the way, are part of ways that we can express our divine nature and also help each one of us in our own evolution and growth. But Saraswati also works not just within what we think of the great creative powers, poetry, theater, dance, in the creation of new ideas. Now we are at a point where we see that our institutional structures are no longer serving the higher good. We have tremendous suffering on the planet. We have tremendous inequality with huge parts of humanity not having enough food to eat, living with unhealthy conditions. So the forms that have taken us to this place are breaking down, and they need to break down because they no longer serve the evolution. So we need to awaken the creative forces within each one of us to evolve new ways of living together, new economic structures, new educational structures. I mean, even our education is not serving the higher needs right now. So all the forms, the institutional structures that we have, were there to serve us up until a certain point, but they're only breaking down because they need to break down. But in the breakdown, new forms, new educational ideas need to emerge, new economic formations need to emerge. So I'll go back to what Shubinda said about Indra helping with the birth of new thought formations, and Saraswati being the creative force within us that enables us to bring out of the divine sphere, out of the ethers, new creative formations. It is said, I've often wondered why Vishnu and Mahadev, Shiva, are not mentioned. They are there, they are mentioned by the Vedic spheres, but they don't have a primary place. And I learned that because their focus was so much on individual evolution, and the Vishnu, Mahadev work at a much grander scale, and yet support these evolutionary forces. So in this role, Narayan works to support Indra's efforts at awakening the higher consciousness. So in terms of our individual and collective well-being, the more we can tune in to these forces within us and call upon the external agencies to help awaken these forces within us, to awaken new thought formations, so that in our individual lives we can solve our challenges, we can pass our struggles, and evolve to where we need to be at an individual level, and at a collective level, help evolve new social formations, a new vision of an economy that works, that supports life, that doesn't destroy our planet. and the Vedic deities, I've only covered two of them, but of course there's Vayu, the pranic energy, which is so vital to our meditations, and Indra and Surya, the light consciousnness. So there's a lot to say within 45 minutes. I refer everyone to Sri Aurobindo's books, because even in there he just touches upon them. But to me, his books are just a starting place for our meditation, because these concepts, beyond concepts, these realities cannot be grasped with the logical mind. One has to awaken the intuitive mind within ourselves, which is what meditation does. In meditation, you tap into the intuitive energy so that you can directly perceive things. You don't need the agency of the mind to interpret things, of the logical, rational mind, which was needed in a certain time of evolution. But our evolutionary call right now is to balance the rational mind with the intuitive mind, which is why meditation is spreading so rapidly around the world, because meditation helps with the awakening of the intuitive mind, where we can directly perceive truths. So I think I will leave that. This is just the beginning of a conversation. Much more can be said, but I think I will end here so that we have time for some questions and discussion. Thank you.
Dena, thank you very much for first starting with so many nice stories, and then taking us on to the symbolism, the deeper symbolism behind the Vedic deities, and especially focusing on Indra and Saraswati and how they can open up new possibilities for us. So there are a few questions here. I'll probably first take some of those, and then I would ask you to maybe develop on the ideas that you've spoken of Indra's role, especially Indra's role in today's context. So we have a question by Radharao ji, who's saying that in the past there were certain mistakes that were committed circumstantially. Can we undo some of these mistakes that were committed? And I'm adding here, how can one connect with the deities to help us undo some of the errors of the past?
I think a lot of errors of the past, don't forget, they've come to us through an age of lower understanding. We've passed a stage where we've been further away from that center of magnetism in the galaxy. And so when I read Sri Aurobindo's book, I take it as a guide to meditation. I mean, even the story in the Ramayana of Ram banishing Sita, I mean, how can we accept that? That Ram the model of Dharma, would never banish Sita. That was a complex situation that unfolded for numerous reasons, and I talk about that in my book. And so these misperceptions, we are awake enough now, there are enough people who are awake now where there could be direct perception of truth. And that is through meditation. Meditation is the key to everything. When people used to come to my guru with a problem, he wouldn't say, do this, that, or that. He'd say, go meditate. Invariably, he would say, go meditate. Because if an answer comes from an external source, how do you know it as your own truth? You have to know these things. And that's why reading, I started on the process, I started on the process of getting my PhD, and I studied the Vedas in graduate school decades ago at Columbia University, but they were taught like Greek mythology. It was taught like Greek mythology, and even as a young woman, I knew that not to be true, and I turned away in disgust, and I said, I'm gonna have to find the answers on my own. And I've been a Kriya Yoga meditator for many, many decades, and there's no replacement for meditation. There's no replacement for it. It can be coupled with study of the text. Study of the text is essential too, but they go together. And so how do we undo these myths? We're in the process now where we have to undo them. And our own evolution and our collective evolution will help us with that. But going back to understand, I mean, in my mind, Sri Aurobindo is the key, because very few of the modern sages speak of the Vedas. The Upanishads and the Gita are more modern articulations of this wisdom, but the Vedas specifically deal with evolution, the awakening of the immortal. And we're at an evolutionary crisis, because if we don't evolve, we will destroy the ecological systems that support life on this planet. And that is the evolutionary crisis we face. And so I say that meditation coupled with study, in the ancient times, you would hear a hymn and then or a line from a sacred text, and then meditate for an hour on that. And that's what I do now. When I read something of Sri Aurobindo, I don't just read it through. When I hear that Indra is the force that creates new thought formations, that's a very profound statement. And that's something we all have thought formations that we need to change, because that's what creates our habits. And so how do we change our habits? How do we change the habit that says, well, I don't want to meditate today. I just don't feel like meditating today. Or I'm going to just, after 15 minutes, well, let me get up. How do we change those habits? We have to awaken that power within us that can change that thought formation.
Yes, thank you very much for those insights. In the Vedas, they also talk about these different forces that are at work. There are the forces of darkness and there are the forces of light. The forces of light being the devatas, And Indra is one of the key devatas. He's the king of those devatas. So what do you recommend? How do you see that we are able to connect to those forces of light in a very real manner? How would you propose that we grow this light in us and connect to the devatas in us? Because you're very passionate about the devatas and the loss of the devatas pains you. So how do you see us, the younger generation, the people who are there, how can we connect to the devatas and not be bound by their religious connotations?
Well, Sri Aurobindo also says that, the truth of the Vedas got encrusted in ritual over time. And, I think ritual certainly serves its purpose, but it has to be just the very, very surface thing. So the forces of breakdown, Sri Aurobindo also talks about those, the dasyus. They're called different things, right? More recently, we call them the Asuric forces. They're part of the divine play because if the formations that don't work, we see them at work right now in our world with the breakdown. What is it that breaks down? They're the energies that break down, that dissolve, that dissipate, that separate. There's a lot of breakdown going on in the world right now, which is awakening fear. Unless one awakens that the divine forces within oneself, you can be very fearful of what's going on in the world. We've got the virus, we've got people who are, there's a lot of lack of truth, lies going on, turning people against each other, polarization, a lot of effort to divide people. But that's because we are at an evolutionary moment, and the evolution may be more critical right now because the planet is in such dire straits. The environmental challenges that we face, the destruction of life systems, the climate change, all of those things are critical issues. And if we don't call upon the higher forces, the higher wisdom, we're going to suffer more. So the question is, right now, that we have to awaken these higher energies in ourselves to overcome the forces that are seeking to divide people and that are seeking to keep in place structures that no longer work. And this is where Saraswati, the creative energy, is needed. Sometimes I call Saraswati Brahmini because she is the feminine aspect of Brahman that is the creative energies. As I travel around the world, I organize a lot of dialogues and sessions, I see that something is greatly urging to break forth. Some creative energy is seeking to break forth that could help us form a new way of living on the planet that doesn't harm the environment and yet that sustains all of life. That energy is seeking to break forth, and a lot of my work is focused mostly on young people who will give birth to this new energy, of how to tap into that, how to awaken Saraswati's energy within us, and how to awaken the new thought forms. I'm basically a devotee of Narayan and Narayani. So this is, they work at the higher level, but within each one of us, we can awaken that higher thought energy, because we need a lot of creative energy. What new society, how can we support ourselves, this huge human community, and not destroy Earth, not destroy other life? It's a huge challenge. There's so many of us now at 8 billion, and we all want to live nicely and well and have enough food and etc. How can we do that without destroying other life forms? That's the challenge. So we need the help of our the divine energies within us, the deities within us, to create new ways of thinking, and new ways of thinking, higher ways of thinking that can solve these problems, and the creative energy to solve these problems.
Yes, thank you very much for those very encouraging words. Hannah, would you like to ask a question?
Oh, yes, of course. So I have another question. It's with respect to education, sort of building off of that notion of Saraswati and connecting to her energy. The reality is, in the world today, a lot of us are taught that we need to have a proper formal education. We need to go to college, we need to at a high degree. And we're slowly learning that oftentimes that's not really serving society. So I'm just wondering if you could talk about that a bit more, and maybe some solutions to that problem as we move into a new era.
Education in the past was different, and education in the future will be different. Education right now is helping people survive in the systems that exist. How can you find your place in the system that exists? What we need is an education that reimagines the whole system, that can reimagine a system that is in keeping with the laws of nature, and that supports the laws of nature, that supports life, and that is in keeping with the laws of Dharma, which is basically supporting all the life systems that exist. And we are part of that life system. So naturally we have to take care of our own, but not at the expense of other life systems, because that will just hurt us. So the deep understanding, we talk a lot about the word interconnection, but if we really understood interconnection, really understood interdependence, the whole society would be organized differently. So, it's just a word, but hopefully that there will be a deeper understanding. More and more people are coming to meditation practices, and that's the only way to access this higher understanding. So the whole system of education has to be re-envisioned, and I know there are a lot of efforts around that now. It's still very small, these efforts, but as we see more breakdown in the systems, I see new efforts that education will arise that are holistic, that look at supporting all of life systems, and how we can support the human community working with all the life systems, not at the expense of the other life systems.
Thank you.
Great, awesome, thank you so much. There's another question here from Anish, and Anish would like to know if mantras will help to reduce this. It says scar, but I'm assuming that means some scars in the mind. Can mantra or meditation help with that, so we don't have such?
No question. I think that there are many techniques available today for neutralizing samskara. I'm a practitioner of Kriya Yoga, which works with the energies in the Sushumna, in the spine, which helps neutralize samskara from the past. Mantra also does this. There are many techniques which now, previously these techniques were hidden, given only to the initiates. You'd have to travel far and wide to find a master who would give you these techniques. But within the last 100 years, many of these techniques are now given out. One has to practice them correctly, and I think that the greatest counsel is to be under the care of a master who can guide one. A mantra helps. Pranayam helps. The ancient sages understood the process of evolution and developed many practices, pranayam exercises, mantra. The time that the Vedic, so we're going back, when you look at the Vedic rishis in the Satya Yuga, they understood the power of vibration, and they understood the power of speech, and there was a very intentional use of speech at that time. It wasn't the speech that we have today where we just blah, 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 blah. Speech was used very intentionally because it awakened certain vibrational energies. That's the power of mantra. But mantra had tremendous power at that time. But during the declining ages, there was so much misuse that this power was lost, still existing, but not in a public usage. So a lot of this is being regained now. And some scars, I'm often amazed through my meditations at things that come up that I had no idea still existed. They were so well secreted, hidden. But there are many practices that neutralize these samskara. Mantra, pranayam. I do the Kriya practice. That the whole purpose of it is neutralizing samskara, so that one can evolve more quickly, so that what might take 1,000 years can be achieved within a few years of would take 1,000 years of natural evolution going through life experience after life experience can be quickened through these practices, which have now come into the public arena, but one has to practice them under the guidance of an evolved being to really be able to use them effectively.
Thank you, yes, Dena. Thank you very much for highlighting the importance of the mantra in our lives and how they can help to repair the samskaras, negative samskaras for us. So we have a comment by Anita ji here who's saying that, Miriam, thank you for sharing your thoughts on human beings on conquering the various electrical and magnetic forces in nature. It is another way for human beings to create more havoc on the planet than what has already been done over the centuries. In my opinion, there's nothing more important to conquer than training of each human mind that is filled with greed, corruption, deceit, violence, and untruths, which are propagated through consciousness. The human mind and collective actions taken or not on a continuous basis impact the pleasure and pain circumstances of other individuals. Enough damage has already been done to impact individuals, families, and societies at large, and needs to be corrected. So basically, your presentation has evoked a lot of this churning that is happening in the minds of many participants. We have Jacqueline Chong, who's saying here that this evolutionary crisis that you spoke about, is it only a crisis that is observed in the Vedas? On how do other traditions or religions relate to and connect with the Vedic thinking? The dysfunction of all kinds is observed, and the breakdown is happening across the globe more intensely and obviously right now. How do you see this awakening happening?
So it's interesting because, I came to the Vedas very young in this life, and I understood from my own guru, Yogananda, about the yugas, the cycles of time. And I couldn't find that in any other tradition. The Western mind looks at a linear trajectory of humankind. And there's a truth in that too, because the cycles push forward that evolution. So one Satya Yuga is not like the previous Satya Yuga. There's a forward movement in addition to the cyclical movement. Things work in cycles, but they move forward. There's a progression to it. So a lot of my work has been to how do you bring together this Western perspective of a linear evolution and this Eastern understanding of the cycles. And actually, that's been a preoccupation of mine for a very, very, very long time. And yet, even within the Western view, there is this idea of a golden age. There is this Adam and Eve, these two figures, which I understand come from the idea of living in a more Satya Yuga, where there was less distinction. The ego was not so developed, so there was less of an ego identification. They were at one with the natural world. And then as this ego identification developed, they fell out of that natural harmony with the natural world. That's going out of the Garden of Eden. So I think even within the Western context, there is this, with all the Western traditions, there is this remembrance. And a lot of this is our remembrance. I mean, we all hold it. We've all been here for a very, very long time, passing through these cycles. It's just a matter of once you tap the intuitive mind, these memories emerge. We've lived during that age. And going back in what I've seen, my latest book goes back to the Satya Yuga, goes back to the Vedic age, when there was just the beginning of this separation, the ego development, where there was a much greater harmony with the natural world. That was the Garden of Eden that the Western people talk about, where there was a less of a distinction. The ego was not so well defined, not so well developed. But over time, many thousands of years, which actually are just a blink of an eye, we've reached the point now where the ego has been so developed that we've lost our identification with the collective. And that's what has to be regained now. So we're moving into an age where we have to regain our identification with the collective. If we did, we wouldn't be destroying the planet. we wouldn't be just thinking of ourselves, we'd be thinking about the collective. You know, do I benefit at the expense of somebody else? When you understand the collective, you understand, how could I benefit? If that person suffers, I'm also suffering because I'm connected to that person. I can't cause suffering to another and not suffer myself. So that's an evolution that we're going through right now. I forgot the question. What was the question?
No, one of the questions was that how do the different religions also relate to this understanding of the evolutionary crisis we're experiencing?
I think that
promote an awakening in the understanding of the gods, using the understanding of the gods.
What the Vedic tradition offers is that there was a very deep understanding of the concept of evolution, of unfolding, because it is the only remnant we have really from the higher age, from a Satya Yuga, where there was a direct intuitive perception. So the intuitive faculty was highly developed in that age, where the rational faculty was less developed. And over the descending yugas, the rational faculty became predominant and the intuitive faculty was subdued. And now we're at the evolutionary point where we have to balance the rational faculty with the intuitive faculty. And so all we have left really from that higher age, yes, we have the myths I consider to be memories, really, they should be called memories, of the Garden of Eden, which was just, what was that? That was when we lived in tune with nature, where we didn't separate ourselves from nature. There was this collective mind. We hadn't yet developed an ego identification of separation. So that remembrance is there embedded. And that remembrance is really the seed for all the Abrahamic traditions. Whereas the difference is that we actually have the hymns, but the hymns from the Vedic rishis are so encoded in imagery that one has to awaken the intuitive mind to attune oneself with their thinking in order to get the deeper meaning of them. You can read those. For example, the word "go." I mean, how much of the stories, you know, when you read commentary in the Vedas, it's all about trying to save the cows. You know, why were these Vedic people so obsessed with cows? Well, it was light. Go is light. It's not any cows, yes, but it was light. The whole initiative was to uncover the light hidden within each one, the higher light. And so, you know, as the ages decline, these became very difficult to understand because the intuitive mind was suppressed as the rational mind was developed. And now we're at the stage where we need to join them and balance the rational mind with the intuitive mind.
Thank you for that insight. Anna, would you like to ask something there?
Sure. So you were speaking about like the collective and how we need to tap into that. So my question is, how do we do that whilst not taking on so much of the collective pain and trauma and letting it affect us too much? How can we practice that in a balanced way?
For me, I can only speak personally. For me, it's always through meditation. I know other people have different practices, but my path is meditation. And so when you enter different states of meditation, you can access the collective. And I think that I think it's actually important to do now because there's a lot of collective fear coming out in different ways. Okay, now there's fear of the pandemic, but there's also fear of where we're sort of at a loss as a humanity because our systems are not working. Our systems are breaking down, and there's this, I think, lurking fear that as we're destroying nature, how are we going to survive as a human community? But just as you can tap into the collective fear, you can tap into the collective creative powers, the imaginative energies. and that's Saraswati within us. And so I think part of our challenge now is to help the collective, because we are part of the collective, and the more people who are engaging in spiritual practice, the more they're impacting the collective. It's essential now for us to tap into our imaginative energies, to awaken Saraswati within each one of us, so that we can help evolve our way of living so that it's more life-supporting, that it's more in keeping with the laws of Dharma. So it's a matter of aligning ourselves more with Dharma. And I think the fact that so many more people are seeking this now, and so many more people are engaged in some form of spiritual practice, whether it's chanting or meditation, which are just different ways of awakening the higher energies within ourselves, awakening that Indra. And don't forget, all of the external forces are internal forces. The external world is a mirror of the internal world. So we think what happened over time with declining age is that we only saw Indra and all the deities as external forces, instead of seeing them as internal forces that are part of the evolutionary process. So yes, they do the whole external world in some level exists, in some level of reality exists, but it's also just a reflection of the internal reality. So the more we work on the internal reality, on our own consciousness, the more we're affecting the external world. So, you know, I came only recently to the Vedic deities. You know, most of my life, I'm a devotee of Narayan and have great love for Mahadev, devotee of Narayani. And so I have focused that bhakti part of myself has been a big part of my spiritual practice. But it's only of late, as I've gone back in time, that I've understood the evolutionary process and the work of these cosmic forces, working as a whole and working individually, because the individual is just a piece of the whole, so it works on both levels. These evolutionary forces working with each one of us. And I've sensed a need right now, I think we all sense, that we're at a critical evolutionary moment. And so we have to look at our own spiritual work as part of the collective spiritual work that we need to do to help the evolution of the species.
Yes, could I just, thank you for that. Could I just combine maybe 3 questions that are coming up, and then I have a personal one as well. So here we have a question by Veronica from the US, where she's saying that regarding taking care and appreciation, because this evolutionary crisis is happening, and we need to connect to these creative forces within. But how do we start? Where do we start? Do we start with children, basically? So she's saying that the taking care and appreciation of the natural world, I believe that if young people were exposed to beauty and the health benefits of growing and using things like medicinal plants, simple culinary herbs in school, at home, in community gardens, we might see more appreciation to the care of the earth. So connecting to the earth directly through her products. And what are your thoughts on that? But then again, connecting to children, there's another one on how do you teach meditation to children at the age of 6 to 12 years old, and how will the children benefit from the learning of meditation? And the last connection on that is that Jeanette is saying that does the type of meditation matter? Non-dual Vedanta, loving kindness, mindfulness. So how would you promote this idea?
Let me go back to the first question. I think about care for the earth, which is a big part of my work, is awakening the love for the earth, because that's where it begins. Actually, if we're to survive as a human community, is attuning ourselves with the life energies of the earth and feeling the oneness again. So, in the evolutionary process, which the Vedic rishis saw this evolutionary process. And they saw that the separation from the rest of life, the development of the ego, which was a necessary part, but also part of the declining yugas, where we fell out of attunement with the intuitive perception, higher with our understanding of the universe, and we're moving more into ego consciousness, that we would reach such a state, which we have now reached, where we could destroy so much of life. How do you now evolve beyond that? It's recapturing the oneness, the sense of connection to all of life in so many different ways. Care for the earth, love for the earth, awakening a love. I mean, really caring and loving all life forms, caring for animal life, caring for plant life, feeling our connection to this life, knowing that we're a family. We really are part of this family of life. And when we harm one part of it, we harm ourselves. So, you know, this term interconnection has come into such wide usage, but it's not really taken deeply into ourselves, because if we understood interconnection, we would behave much differently on the earth. So, so I think that's part of what we're challenged to do now, is to evolve beyond this sense of separation and come again into the realization of our connectedness, and that we are part of the whole, and that we are given the charge of caring for the whole. Now, in terms of meditation with young people, I think that there are so many, I think it's very important to start young people connecting to their internal life, so they're not just focused internally. And there's so many ways to do this. When my children were young, I used to do guided meditations with them, where I would do visualizations with them of you know, flowering lotuses where there's a light coming out of it. I mean, you can come up there are so much more available now, but you can also come out with your own, because what we're challenged to do now is awaken the imaginal energies. And in young people, we work a lot in my organization with young adults in their 30s, because they are going to have to lead a new direction for the way we live on the earth, but also young people 5-6 years old who are just coming into their learning about the physical world. They should all be doing meditation, guided meditations at first, where we can help them connect with the internal forces, because for so long education has been devoid of any connection to the internal energies, and just outer, you know, how to survive in this world, instead of how to awaken your creative energies. And in order to, what is needed now on the planet is an awakening of the creative energies, which, you know, one may see that as the work of Saraswati deity. One can see it in many different ways, but it's awakening of the creative energies, so that a more holistic way of living on the planet, we can bring that into being. We can realize that. That's the challenge of young people. So a lot of my work in my organization is working with young leaders to help them awaken these imaginal energies within themselves, so that they can be part of re-envisioning the way we live on this earth. That was the first question. Were there other questions?
It was, you answered both of them, because you spoke about the relationship with the earth, and then you spoke also about the different kinds of meditations that can help youngsters connect to themselves, center in themselves. So you covered both of them. And the last comment I had was, no comment, it was a quotation by Sri Aurobindo that I wanted to share with you. Your thoughts on that in the context of the session that you have presented. Aurobindo says, the recovery of the perfect truth of the Vedas is not merely a desideratum of modern intellectual curiosity, but a practical necessity for the future of the human race. So this was an inspiration for me personally to take on my studies in Sanskrit and all. But I would love to hear from you, I would love to hear your thoughts on the importance of this statement of his, or this declaration, in our present crisis, and in the context of the role that the Vedic Godheads could play for us today.
So it has been very painful to me to see how the deities have been presented, actually, even in shows that I greatly love. I never bought into this idea of Indra being jealous and petty, deity, external force. But it was Sri Aurobindo who helped guide me to the inner reality of all of these forces that we call the deities. I don't even know what word to use today, because in the West, we have such an external idea of the gods. I try not to use the gods. I use the word devis and devas because they're light forms, they're light beings. And that describes it better. But our words have been so misused that it's hard to find the correct terms for these cosmic forces that have both an external and internal reality, and that are all working toward the evolution, the unfolding of the universes, the many universes. And each one of us plays a part in that unfolding because we're part of the whole. So as we awaken these forces within us, but since I've been deeply involved with Les many months in writing my book, I have come most specifically in relationship with Indra. And now I look at what Sri Aurobindo said in a totally different light, because it's personal experience now. And I see Indra continually at work. It's the light-filled mind, the higher mind seeking to awaken within us. Each one of us holds a piece of that. So Indra, we think of Indra as an external force, and the way he's portrayed in the Puranas and so many of the stories that have come down through the ages of a loss of this knowledge. I mean, what Sri Aurobindo was doing was regaining a knowledge that had been lost through thousands of years and that had been externalized. And so the way they're portrayed, all the deities are portrayed as external forces. And yes, there is an external reality, but the external world is a projection of the inner world. So for you, the concern of us is the inner world. And that's where these forces are most active within each one of us. And so since I've been engaged in writing this book, I have been in relationship with Indra and have come to love Indra dearly. And now, as the sages did, welcome his challenges, because how can you grow without challenges? If you're not given these challenges, how are you going to grow? You know, you can stay very comfortably at a certain level and remain there for lifetimes. But is that really what we want, to remain in that level and just have things all work out and not grow into a higher realization? Once you decide that your goal is to grow into a higher realization, then you invite the deities to do their work. Otherwise, they're happy to allow you to spend lifetime after lifetime in the world of cause and effect. You do this, and that comes back to you. You do that, and it comes back to you. And you're just operating the law of cause and effect. But once you make the decision, no, I want to exist in the higher reality, then you invite Indra and Agni and the others to do their work. This Indra and this Indrani, there's the feminine form of Indra, which I'm just beginning to reflect on. But to me, Indra is that internal force that is seeking to awaken the higher mind, the higher understanding. And I see that force at work in my life all the time. And I get put to the tests. And then when I invoke Indra and invoke the higher force, I can see what really is going on. And I can see what I'm meant to learn from that test. We all have tests. That's what life is. We all have struggles in life. Sometimes, occasionally, we get a vacation life where there aren't too many struggles, but there's not much growth that takes place in those vacation lives. You know, so if we want growth, then we invite these challenges of these forces to help us grow. And that's when these challenges come for the purpose of awakening us to the higher reality.
Thank you. Yes.
Thank you, Dena. So I have one kind of like comment, which is like building off of a question that I think is really important to raise, especially when we're talking about coming into a higher reality, and that's the food that we eat, and the importance of following, ideally, a vegan, but at least a vegetarian diet. I have a comment here from Gita, who says, "Today I read about the need to stop factory farming of animals to secure the health of the people working with the animals, to address the ethical issues and to avoid slaughtering, etc. a lot of people have shifted to a vegetarian or vegan diet. And she continues to say it took a pandemic for people to consider stopping eating meat. And it had to get to like this level, to this magnitude of a full pandemic for people to start thinking like maybe I shouldn't eat meat. So could you say anything about the importance of vegetarian diet in all of this?
Well, I've been a vegetarian for most of my life. You know, I look to earlier ages when eating an animal was a different process. You know, you went out, you asked the blessing of the animal, you wished the animal on its evolutionary path, and you took the life of the animal into your own body. That was a different time. Now we have factory farming, where we're imposing inconceivable suffering on masses of animals at such a massive level. And if we know, we use the word interconnected, interdependent so freely, but if we really live in that reality, then we are suffering with those animals. We're causing suffering. We're causing so much suffering for what? We don't need it. There's so much else that can be ingested today. So, you know, I think that people have to come to this on their own. But once you awaken and you want to help with the evolution of the planet, we know that we cannot continue to cause such suffering to so many beings and progress and prosper ourselves. Because when we cause suffering to other beings, we ourselves will suffer as a result. That is the meaning of interconnection, that we are in them and they are in us. And so, you know, now there's so much that's been revealed about what's taking place on these factory farms. It's an industry, it's industrial farming where the animals are skinned even before they die. I mean, it's painful that we as a human community have so little love in us that we do this to our fellow creatures. And so, and yet I know some people are addicted to meat. And so I say, do what you can, do what you can. You know, each person, if it means eating less meat, if it means eating different kinds of meat, for those who have to, who can't give up meat, take it step by step. I think ultimately we will evolve into a human community that doesn't live off the life of other beings, of animals. And so I think that is an important step for humanity to, it's not just the eating of animals, it's causing such suffering to other forms of life. Because if we know interconnection, then we're causing suffering to all of life. And we have to outgrow that as a human society.
Yeah, and it's also like when we eat meat, it's in tamagun. It's not in, you know, it's not like pure. It's not taking us into sattvagun when we eat meat. And so,
we're also yeah, and we're ingesting the fear. What do these animals go through when they're being, you know, they're conscious creatures. So we're ingesting their fear and their, you know, helplessness, because there's not much they can do when they're put in cages and killed like that. So it's something that I hope the human community will outgrow very soon.
Me too.
Thank you very much, Dena, for highlighting the importance of our interconnectedness. And interconnectedness not just with us humans, but with the creatures on the earth. And also, I think what your presentation has highlighted for us is the interconnected we share with the godheads of the different worlds. And becoming an important center, because in the Vedas, Sri Aurobindo talks of man being the stage of this entire drama, and all of the cosmic game is unfolding through the life experience of the human being, where we have the choice of either siding with the gods, the forces of light, or siding unconsciously with the forces of darkness. And I think that's also the call of yoga, the entire purpose of this festival that we have been collaborating on is about trying to help us become more and more aware of the need to invest in our awareness of our deeper truth and the interconnectivity with the world around us. So thank you very much for that, Dena. If I can now just make the announcements for tomorrow's programs, and we'll come back to you. I think Hannah and you can share with our participants how they can collaborate, because you've been doing a yeoman's task all these decades to try and create this awareness in various groups across the world. So if you could let our participants know how they can collaborate, how they can join this effort of yours, all of your group together. And then we'll request you for a positive message. Anna will request you for that positive message. So I'll just move on to just making the announcements for the tomorrow's program. So Srinivasji, may I please request you to show that poster? Tomorrow morning we have a talk by Professor Kiran Kumar, who is a former professor of psychology from University of Mysore. And he has been a long-time devotee of Ramana Maharshi. And that has also had its influence on his understanding of psychology. So he's going to be talking on the perspectives on well-being and yoga in the morning session. In the afternoon session, we are going to have another wonderful presentation by the team Sunad, which is comprised of Bala Subramaniam ji, Tara Kini ji, whom we've already met earlier on, Rama Srinivasan ji and Shanti Subramanian ji. And the talk is going to be on the organization, the music group that they have called Sunad. And it will be about the work that they do. So Sunad, Dhrupad and the Upanishads. And in the evening, maybe I'll allow Hannah to announce the program of the evening, since it's a program that the Global Peace Initiatives of Women is coordinating. Hannah?
So tomorrow evening, we have a program on Dharma, yoga, and economic well-being. And that is going to be co-moderated by Dena and Anuradha. And we're going to have 3 really interesting panelists. We have Manish Jain, who is a thought leader on rethinking education. We spoke today about education and how we can shift that, and in shifting that, shift society for the better. So he's really an expert in that space. And we also have Swami Atmarupananda, who is an American Swami of the Ramakrishna order, who came to Vedic thoughts, Hinduism at a very young age, and Prashant Singh, who is also an expert in the space of Dharma and economic well-being. So we're really looking forward to that tomorrow. And Anuradha, should we go to the... Okay, so Dena, do you want to just share a little bit about GPIW and how folks can get involved if they're interested in learning about our work, and any other final remarks you might have for the group?
Well, the work of GPIW has evolved over the last few decades, and really now it's about awakening consciousness so that we can envision a more Dharmic world, and working with economic systems. How can we, education, everything, how can they be realigned as we are facing an evolutionary crisis with the planet, with so much destruction on the planet? There's a greater need now for the awakening of our consciousness. And so there are many, many individuals and organizations doing that, and that's our work. We partner with a lot of these individuals and organizations in different programs to help with the awakening of consciousness. And so any kind of practices, mantra, meditation, all of these practices and the spread of these practices are now creating enough of an awakened community that we feel that we will be able to redirect our whole style of living on this planet, where it can be more in harmony with the laws of Dharma. So my last message in understanding, as I've looked back in time and really kind of looked at our evolution and seeing where we are at this moment, I look at the Vedic deities as which are really one of the few deities that come to us from a higher age, or forces that were captured in the Vedas. And we have to really awaken our own meditative powers to understand, because they're couched in images and metaphors. But when we align ourselves with the energy of the rishis and awaken our own creative powers, we can access the deep, deep wisdom that has come to us through these hymns. And there is a need now So I hope a new understanding as we're moving into a higher age of understanding. And I hope that the meditation has become much more common. Study of the ancient texts is being done in a new light. I hope that we can awaken our imaginal energies and awaken the thought powers within us so that we can redirect the human community and put to bed the structures left over from the Kali Yuga and bring into being new structures and new ways of living together on our beloved earth that will be life-supporting and that will lead us in a direction that is more holistic and awakened. So we're in the process slowly of awakening, and the more of us who can engage in that process, the more we can help the whole earth community, not just the human community, but the animal community, the plant life. The whole will benefit from our spiritual efforts. So my message is, and I say this to myself all the time, continue on with your spiritual efforts because each piece is helping the whole.
Thank you very much, Dena. I think that's a very important final piece in the puzzle that we all need to apply ourselves to doing, to achieving. Just being that one important piece that allows the whole puzzle to be complete and harmonious and interconnected. Thank you for that. So with these few words, look forward to tomorrow's session again. And we hope that a lot of Indra will manifest itself in what emerges about new paradigms of economy and how yoga and dharma can play key and act as a foundation for a new economy to emerge. We have this opportunity now. So thank you once again. Thank you, Hannah, for co-anchoring this and leading the session also. Thank you. I'd like to request Srinivas ji to please show the banner for tomorrow's program. And then we have an Om to end the program. And I invite all our participants to join in this collective sounding so that we can feel that connection wherever we are in the world. So thank you once again.